Dr. Arjun Mehta thought he had found the perfect wife in Priya Sharma, but 2 days after their wedding in Australia, he discovered a devastating secret that his bride was living a hidden identity. What began as a fairy tale marriage quickly descended into a nightmare of betrayal, rage, and murder that would shock 2 nations and destroy everything he had built. Dr. Arjun Mehta had always lived his life by precision and discipline. As a top surgical resident at a Sydney hospital, his reputation was built on skill, control, and perfection. His colleagues admired his quiet confidence, and his patients trusted him without hesitation. Yet behind his professional composure, Arjun was lonely. He had moved to Australia years earlier to chase a career that left little room for companionship. His parents, still living in Mumbai, constantly reminded him that success meant nothing without a family. The pressure to marry began to grow, and soon they introduced him to Priya Sharma, a woman who seemed to embody everything he wanted. Priya appeared perfect. Her voice was soft, her manners elegant, and her education impressive. She was well-spoken and carried herself with the kind of modest grace that appealed deeply to Arjun's traditional upbringing. Their connection started with a simple online introduction arranged by their families, but it quickly blossomed into daily video calls and long messages. Arjun found her laughter refreshing after endless hours at the hospital. She listened to his stories about work and made him feel understood in a way no one else ever had. Within months, he was convinced he had met his soulmate. The wedding took place in India, small but lavish, filled with family, flowers, and photographs. Arjun's parents were proud to see their son finally married. Priya's family appeared reserved but polite, insisting on a quiet ceremony before the couple returned to Australia. Everyone commented on how beautiful the bride looked, and how lucky Arjun was to find such a gentle, kind-hearted woman. For Arjun, the day felt like the beginning of a perfect life. When they arrived in Sydney, Arjun rented a spacious apartment overlooking the river. He decorated it with care, wanting Priya to feel comfortable in their new home. In the first few days, everything seemed wonderful. They explored the city together, went shopping, and shared quiet dinners. But small things began to unsettle him. Priya avoided physical affection, claiming she needed time to adjust to the new environment. She refused to be photographed and always kept her belongings locked in a suitcase. When Arjun asked why, she smiled nervously and changed the subject. He noticed other peculiarities too. Priya often disappeared into the bathroom for long periods, emerging pale and distant. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night to find her sitting silently on the couch, staring out the window. When he tried to comfort her, she claimed she was just homesick. Her voice trembled every time she said it. At first, Arjun dismissed his worries. He told himself she was simply nervous, adapting to a new country and a new marriage. He didn't want to be the impatient husband his friends often warned him about, but a growing unease started to form in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Priya's distance became harder to ignore. Days turned into weeks, and still, she resisted intimacy. When he planned a small dinner with friends, she begged him to cancel, saying she didn't feel ready to meet anyone. She barely spoke to his colleagues and spent most of her time alone in the apartment. When Arjun returned from work, he often found her on her phone, quickly locking the screen as soon as he entered the room. Despite the growing silence between them, Arjun kept trying to bridge the gap. He brought her gifts, took her on scenic drives, and even planned weekend getaways. But no matter what he did, she remained withdrawn, lost in thoughts he couldn't reach. Every small rejection chipped away at his confidence. The woman he had loved so icily now felt like a stranger in his home. One evening, while cleaning the living room, Arjun noticed a small envelope tucked beneath the sofa. Inside was a photographed Priya with short hair, dressed in what appeared to be men's clothing, smiling beside a man he didn't recognize. The name scrawled on the back read Prithvi. Arjun froze, confused but unwilling to believe the implications. He stared at the photo for a long time, trying to make sense of it, but decided not to confront her. Instead, he hid the picture in his drawer, pretending he had never seen it. As the days passed, the image burned in his mind. The smile, the name, the strange familiarity, it all haunted him. Something about Priya's story didn't fit, and Arjun, a man who always demanded clarity, found himself trapped in uncertainty. His marriage, which began with love and trust, was beginning to feel like a puzzle built on hidden pieces. He couldn't yet see the full picture, but deep inside, a cold realization was taking shape. The woman sleeping beside him was not who she claimed to be, and the truth waiting to surface would soon destroy everything he knew about love, trust, and himself. The discovery of the photograph marked the beginning of Arjun's descent into quiet paranoia. The image of Priya with short hair and a different name refused to leave his mind. During surgeries, he found himself distracted, replaying every moment they had shared. Her hesitation, her fear of closeness, her locked suitcase. Suddenly, everything seemed like a clue he had missed. He began to question his judgment and even his sanity. Could Priya really be hiding something so enormous, or was he imagining it out of frustration? But the unease in his gut kept gnawing at him, pushing him to look deeper. Late one night, when Priya fell asleep on the couch, Arjun approached her luggage with trembling hands. He picked the lock carefully, his heart pounding with guilt and anticipation. Inside, he found a neat arrangement of clothes, documents, and medication bottles he had never seen before. The labels were medical estrogen supplements, hormone blockers, and a prescription under the name Prithvi Sharma. His hands began to shake as he picked up the papers beneath them. They were hospital records signed, dated, and stamped by clinics in Delhi. Each one referenced procedures, consultations, and follow-ups for gender reassignment. The truth struck him like a blade. Priya Sharma, the woman he had married, was biologically male. The world around him seemed to blur. His breath grew shallow, his mind racing to connect the fragments of deception. Every lie she had told, her reluctance, her secrecy, her fear made sense now. He sank to the floor, the papers scattered around him, staring blankly at the carpet. He felt betrayed in ways words couldn't describe. His marriage, his family's pride, his future all built on what he now saw as a devastating lie. When Priya stirred awake and called his name, Arjun stayed silent. He put everything back as it was, his face expressionless, and pretended nothing had happened. Inside, however, something in him had shifted. The love and care that once defined his feelings were replaced by bitterness and disbelief. He studied her now, every word she said, every movement she made. He noticed the nervous glances, the trembling hands when he got too close. She could sense that something had changed but didn't know why. Over the next few days, their home became a silent battleground. Arjun stopped touching her, stopped asking questions, and spoke only when necessary. At work, his colleagues noticed his growing irritability. He stayed late at the hospital, avoiding going home. He spent long hours reading about legal cases and psychological studies, trying to make sense of what he had discovered. In his mind, he replayed the betrayal again and again until it became unbearable. One evening, he sat in his car outside their apartment, unable to bring himself to go inside. His thoughts turned dark, spiraling into rage. He thought of his parents in India, how proud they had been, how they believed their son had found a perfect wife. The shame, he imagined, would destroy them. His life's image, built carefully over years, felt like it was collapsing. He convinced himself that he was the victim of deceit, that his pain was not only justified but deserved retribution. Priya tried to reach him, sensing the cold distance growing wider. She prepared dinner, waited for him at night, and asked if something was wrong. Each time, he responded with silence or a brief nod. His restraint was slipping, but his professional calm kept him from acting. Yet, inside him, resentment festered like a wound. One afternoon, while she was showering, he stood outside the bathroom door, listening to the sound of running water. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. His reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, eyes sunken, jaw tight, expression unreadable. He was no longer the composed doctor who saved lives. He was a man drowning in betrayal. The following week, he began following her. He checked her messages when she left her phone unattended and traced her online activity. When she said she was going to a nearby store, he watched from a distance. His suspicions deepened when he saw her meeting a man at a cafe. The two spoke quietly, leaning close, and she appeared anxious. That moment shattered whatever restraint he had left. To him it was confirmation that she was conspiring against him, mocking his trust, and continuing to live a lie. That night, Arjun barely slept. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind filled with conflicting emotions, grief, anger, humiliation. He could not share the truth with anyone. It was too shameful, too personal. The burden of secrecy pressed on him like a weight he couldn't escape. He began to drink, something he had never done before. Each glass dulled his pain, but only briefly. Then the anger returned, sharper each time. By the end of that week, Arjun had transformed into someone unrecognizable. His colleagues whispered about his mood swings and distant behavior. He ignored their concern, hiding behind the guise of exhaustion. But in his apartment, the tension had become suffocating. Every glance between him and Priya carried suspicion. Every silence carried danger. Neither of them knew it, but their marriage was heading toward a breaking point, one that would soon erupt in violence neither of them could escape. The tension in the Mehta apartment had become unbearable. The air was heavy with suspicion and unspoken anger. Arjun's discovery had poisoned every moment, turning simple gestures into reminders of betrayal. He moved through the house like a ghost, cold and distant, his mind consumed by thoughts of what Priya had done to him. She sensed his change but didn't understand the full extent of what he knew. Her fear grew with every passing day. She started spending more time away from the apartment, claiming to run errands or visit friends. But Arjun, no longer trusting a word she said, began following her. One afternoon, he trailed her through the city. He stayed far enough behind that she wouldn't notice him. His heart pounded as he watched her sit at a cafe across the street, waiting nervously. Moments later, a man in his 40s joined her. He was well-dressed, confident, and seemed familiar with her. They spoke in hushed tones, leaning close across the table. The sight of Priya smiling, even faintly, at another man sent a surge of anger through Arjun's chest. He stayed long enough to watch them shake hands before leaving separately. That image burned into his mind. When he later discovered the man's identity, Dr. Naresh Kapoor, a plastic surgeon from Delhi, everything fell into place. Kapoor's name appeared on the medical documents he had found in Priya's suitcase. He was the one who had helped her transition. Arjun's emotions turned from betrayal to rage. He felt manipulated not just by Priya but by everyone involved in keeping the secret. His thoughts spiraled into paranoia. What if they had all plotted against him? What if the marriage had been arranged only to deceive him? He spent nights pacing the apartment, his mind racing between fury and despair. His once calm, logical demeanor had vanished, replaced by erratic bursts of anger and obsessive behavior. Priya noticed his growing volatility. She avoided eye contact, avoided being alone in the same room with him, and spent hours locked in the bedroom. Arjun's silence terrified her. There were no confrontations, no words exchanged, just the cold presence of a man whose emotions she could no longer read. Sometimes she woke at night to find him standing by the window, staring outside without moving. The sight of him in the dark, motionless, filled her with dread. Arjun's colleagues began asking questions at work. He had missed several shifts and appeared distracted during surgeries. When asked if everything was all right, he would force a smile and brush it off. But the cracks in his composure were visible. One of his friends even suggested he take a short break. He agreed but knew he had no intention of resting. The time away from work would give him space to think and plan. Inside his apartment, the walls seemed to close in. Every photograph of their wedding, every decoration she had chosen, felt like mockery. He deleted her pictures from his phone, tore her name from the framed certificates that hung on the wall, and poured himself drink after drink to drown the chaos inside his head. But no amount of alcohol could erase the image of that cafe, the man she met, or the papers that proved she had lied about everything. Priya, meanwhile, was desperate. She wrote emails to a friend back in India, saying she was afraid and didn't know how much longer she could stay. She considered leaving Arjun and returning home, but she hesitated. She feared the consequences, both his reaction and the shame of her secret becoming public. She wanted to believe that maybe, somehow, things could still be repaired. But deep inside, she knew Arjun's silence was not forgiveness. It was the calm before something terrible. One evening, when Arjun returned home, Priya tried to speak. She approached him cautiously, asking if they could start over. Her voice shook, but she was sincere. Arjun stared at her blankly, not replying. He watched her carefully, his mind detached, his expression empty. The silence stretched for so long that Priya retreated into the bedroom, trembling. She didn't see the look in his eyes, a hollow stare that no longer held emotion, only purpose. That night, Arjun sat alone in the living room, surrounded by darkness. He scrolled through old messages and photos, each one fueling his bitterness. In his mind, Priya was no longer the woman he loved. She was a fraud, a symbol of humiliation that had stripped him of his dignity and identity. His thoughts twisted into justification. He told himself he had been deceived, mocked, and emotionally destroyed. What he was contemplating wasn't violence. He reasoned it was retribution. By midnight, the decision was made. The quiet, rational doctor that everyone respected had disappeared, replaced by a man consumed by vengeance. As he stared at the surgical bag resting near his chair, he felt a cold sense of control returning. The instruments inside, once tools to save lives, would soon serve a darker purpose. The next morning, when Priya woke, she noticed the air in the apartment felt heavier. Arjun moved with eerie calmness, speaking softly and even offering breakfast. It was the first time in weeks he had smiled, but there was no warmth in it. She tried to read his expression but couldn't. For a fleeting moment, she wanted to believe he had forgiven her. She didn't realize that his calm wasn't peace, it was the stillness that comes just before a storm. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of their apartment, but there was no warmth in the light. Arjun had already been awake for hours, sitting in the dim corner of the living room with a cup of untouched tea. His face was expressionless, his thoughts methodical and cold. Every trace of emotion had drained from him. The previous night had solidified his resolve. He no longer saw Priya as a person deserving compassion. She had become, in his mind, the embodiment of deceit that had ruined his life and reputation. The betrayal had twisted his sense of morality until vengeance felt like justice. Priya emerged from the bedroom slowly, still unsure how to act around him. His sudden calmness frightened her more than his earlier anger. She felt something had changed, something irreversible. Trying to ease the tension, she offered to make breakfast, speaking softly, but Arjun simply nodded, his eyes distant. As she moved around the kitchen, he studied her quietly, the way she reached for plates, the way her hair fell on her shoulders, how she hummed a tune, absent-mindedly. For a moment, the memory of their wedding day flashed in his mind, but instead of love, it reignited his fury. The vows, the promises, the blessings, they all felt like part of the lie. While Priya cooked, Arjun went to the bedroom and opened the closet. From a hidden compartment in his luggage, he retrieved a small metal case, the surgical kit he had used during his training years. He opened it, examining the instruments one by one, gleaming scalpels, scissors, forceps. They were clean, precise, and sharp. He placed the kit inside a drawer beside the bed and covered it with clothes. Everything about his movements was calm, practiced, almost ritualistic. That afternoon, they decided to go for a walk by the nearby lake. It was Priya's suggestion, hoping the fresh air might bring some normalcy. Arjun agreed, his tone unnervingly composed. They walked in silence. side by side, occasionally crossing paths with joggers and couples, enjoying the weather. Priya tried to speak about returning to work, about finding peace again, but Arjun's responses were short, detached. To outsiders, they looked like a newlywed couple enjoying a quiet stroll, but beneath that illusion was a storm of suppressed rage and fear. When they returned home, the atmosphere grew heavy again. The house felt smaller, the walls closer. Priya went to the bathroom to freshen up, unaware that Arjun had locked the front door. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the lock, but he steadied himself. His breathing slowed, his thoughts focusing entirely on what he was about to do. Priya stepped out, drying her hands, and noticed Arjun standing in the hallway, watching her. His eyes had a cold, hollow look that made her freeze. She tried to speak, but no words came. The silence between them was suffocating. Arjun took a step closer, and in that moment, she realized what was coming. Panic surged through her. She stumbled backward, but he moved faster. What happened next was sudden, violent, and precise. The man who had once taken an oath to heal now moved like a surgeon performing an operation, steady, focused, detached from the horror of his actions. Priya's screams filled the apartment, echoing through the walls, but no one heard. The sharp sound of metal meeting flesh, the desperate struggle, the thud of collapsing furniture, it was all over within minutes. When the noise finally stopped, the apartment fell into eerie silence again. Arjun stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily. His hands were trembling, his white shirt splattered with red. Priya lay motionless on the floor, her eyes wide open, reflecting a mix of shock and fear. For a moment, Arjun simply stared at her, unable to process what he had done. Then something inside him snapped completely. He dropped the instrument, stumbled backward, and sank onto the couch, his face pale, his mind blank. The anger that had driven him for days was gone, replaced by an overwhelming emptiness. Hours passed before he moved again. He cleaned his hands methodically, changed his clothes, and placed the surgical tools back into their case. His movements were automatic, mechanical. He didn't look at Priya again. Instead, he sat quietly, staring at the wall as the city outside continued its ordinary rhythm. Sirens, traffic, and distant voices drifted through the window, indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded inside. By nightfall, the weight of what he had done began to sink in. He realized there was no undoing it, no way to escape the truth. The reality of the crime settled over him like a suffocating blanket. For a fleeting moment, he considered calling the police, confessing everything, but shame and fear stopped him. Instead, he poured himself another drink, staring into the glass as though it held the answers. The apartment, once filled with laughter and plans for a new life, had become a silent tomb. Outside, the city lights flickered across the skyline. Inside, Arjun sat motionless, his mind drifting between guilt and denial. Somewhere deep within, he knew that this silence would not last. The truth had a way of emerging, no matter how carefully it was hidden. And when it did, there would be no redemption left for the man who had let love turn into murder. The next morning, the apartment was eerily still. The curtains were drawn shut, trapping the stale air from the night before. Arjun sat in the same spot on the couch, staring blankly at the floor where the blood had already begun to dry into a dark maroon stain. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him like an invisible hand around his throat. He felt neither sorrow nor relief, only numbness. The sound of his own breathing seemed louder than the world outside. The sun rose, but its light felt intrusive, as if it was trying to expose everything he wanted to hide. Eventually, his surgeon's instincts returned. He moved with mechanical precision, fetching cleaning supplies from the kitchen. He scrubbed the floor until his hands ached, but the stains would not completely disappear. The smell of bleach filled the air, burning his nose and throat, but it wasn't enough to erase the crime that had taken place there. He wrapped Priya's body in a white bedsheet, careful and deliberate, just as he had once handled patients in surgery. The irony of it made him psychist. Training meant to save lives was now guiding him in concealing a murder. He waited until nightfall before he carried the body to his car. Every step down the building's stairwell felt heavier than the last. He glanced around nervously, but the hallway was empty. The city outside was quiet, the occasional car passing in the distance. He placed the body in the trunk and drove aimlessly for hours, trying to decide what to do. His thoughts raced. He couldn't go to the police, he couldn't leave her there, and he couldn't live with what he had done. Each option felt impossible. Eventually, he stopped near a deserted area on the outskirts of the city, where construction sites and abandoned lots stretched into darkness. The cold air bit at his skin as he carried the body out of the car. He dug shallowly into the ground with a metal rod he found nearby, trembling as he worked. When it was done, he lowered the wrapped form into the earth, his breathing ragged and uneven. He didn't say anything, not a prayer, not an apology, just silence. When he covered her with soil, the sound of dirt hitting fabric echoed in his mind like a haunting rhythm he would never forget. He returned home before dawn, exhausted but unable to sleep. The apartment felt emptier than before. Every sound, every shadow reminded him of her laughter, her voice, the way she used to sit by the window. He tried to convince himself that what he did was an act of rage, a moment of madness. But no matter how he tried to justify it, The image of her terrified eyes before she fell stayed with him. It played over and over in his mind, louder each time. 2 days later, the hospital noticed Arjun's absence. When he didn't show up for his shift, colleagues tried calling, but his phone went unanswered. A concerned neighbor eventually reported strange smells from his apartment, unaware that the odor came not from decay, but from the overpowering mix of bleach and chemicals. Police arrived at his door that evening, and though they found nothing incriminating inside, they noted the faint traces of blood mist during cleaning. Arjun was brought in for questioning after Priya's parents filed a missing person report. He initially tried to maintain composure, claiming that Priya had left him after a marital dispute, but the detectives, seasoned and observant, noticed inconsistencies in his story. When they pressed him about the photograph found in his drawer, the one with the name Prithvi on the back, his confidence cracked. He began sweating, stammering, losing control of his carefully rehearsed answers. Within hours, his story unraveled. The police obtained CCTV footage of him driving out of the city at night, alone, and returning before sunrise. When confronted with the evidence, Arjun broke down completely. He confessed to everything: the discovery, the rage, the killing. His words came out between sobs, fragmented and hollow. The officers who listened later said there was no emotion left in him, just a mechanical recounting of events. The search team located Priya's body 2 days later, buried shallowly near the industrial zone where Arjun had left her. Forensic tests confirmed the cause of death: a deep, clean incision to the neck, consistent with surgical instruments. The brutality and precision stunned investigators. News spread quickly, both in Australia and India, sparking outrage and shock. The once respected doctor became the face of a tragedy that blurred the line between love, deception, and obsession. In court, Arjun remained silent through most of the proceedings. The judge described his actions as a crime born not of madness, but of pride. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with no chance of parole for 25 years. As he was led away, his expression was blank, his once steady hands now trembling. In his prison cell, Arjun spent his days writing letters that he never sent, letters addressed to Priya, filled with apologies, confusion, and endless questions. Sometimes he imagined her voice responding. Other times he wished he had walked away instead of letting his anger consume him. But it was too late. The silence of the cell was his only company now. Outside the walls, the world moved on. But inside, time had stopped the night he chose vengeance over understanding.